All right, everybody. Well, welcome to a rainy Sunday in Central Ohio, and I'm so glad that you all could still be in church today. And I want to give a special welcome right now to anyone that's in the room at any of our other Cypress campus locations. I'm so glad that you could be here, and of course, all of you that are worshiping online today, so glad you could join us as well as all of you here at our Alton Darby broadcast campus. We're going to be getting into the final week of this teaching series that we've been in the whole month. It's called Right on the Money. And it's been a series just to try to examine how can we manage all of the resources that have been given to us. And man, it's been such a good series. If you've missed any, you can go on to either the YouTube channel, the Cypress app, get caught up later this week. But for this final week, what I want to do just to kind of get our wheels turning about where we're going to be going is I want you to consider a question. And again, this has been a financial teaching series. And the question that I want you to consider is one day we are all going to die, and when you die, if you could only pass on one thing in this life, what would it be? And I want you to really think about that, and money cannot be your answer. Like when you die, if you could only pass on one thing to someone else, what would that be? Maybe it's a car, maybe it's like a family recipe that you would always want to make sure gets passed on. This wouldn't be my preference, but maybe for some of you it's a pet. I know there's a lot of dog people, cat people out there, but if you could only pass on one thing, I'm going to give you 10 seconds. I want you to turn to the person next to you at every campus and tell them what it is and why. You have 10 seconds, all right? Ready? Go. All right, I'm going to go ahead and bring us back together. I think I heard some pretty good answers here at the Alton Darby campus. But the whole idea of there's going to be a point in time where we are no longer here, everything we have is going to be passed on. What if I told you that the single most important thing that you could ever pass on, it's not something you could place your hands on, but it's an attitude or it's a way of thinking about money. There's this fascinating quote that I came across a few weeks ago from like 1950 to the year 2000. One of the most influential preachers and ministers was a guy named Billy Graham. And I was studying some of his stuff, and a few weeks ago I came across this quote that I want to share with you, where Billy Graham said in one of his messages that if a person gets their attitude toward money straight, it will help straighten out almost every other area of their life. So think about how powerful that is for just a minute. If someone gets their attitude straight, the way they think about money, it could influence their relationships, their mental and emotional health, their workplace environment. Like everything could be changed just because of the way that they think about money and their attitude. And in Isaiah 29 in the Old Testament, there's an interesting verse where God is speaking, and he says there's an issue here because he said these people, they're honoring me with their lips, they're saying the right thing, they're doing the right thing, but at the same time, their hearts are far from me. So God is saying you're doing the right thing, but you just don't have the right attitude. And with the whole idea of money management, there's two lanes here. You could be doing the right thing, you could be saving, you could be investing, you could be honoring God, but if you're writing a tithe check or you're giving to other organizations with a frown on your face and a bad attitude, you're sort of missing part of the point. And so what I want to talk about in this final week into the series is what are the things that we can do to really develop the right attitude or mindset about money. And what I want you to recognize is that when we acknowledge this, when we develop the right attitude, we actually begin to experience true joy as God intended in this whole realm of our personal finances. And so in this final weekend, it's 4 shifts that we can all make in the way that we think and our attitude towards money. That's what I'm going to teach through. And the first shift to make that we all can make, it's to move from compensation to calling. To shift from valuing compensation to calling. Each and every one of you, no matter who you are or where you're listening from, you have a calling from God on your life. And in the New Testament, Paul explained this when he was writing to the Ephesian church. It's in Ephesians 4 where Paul said, "Therefore I, a prisoner for serving the Lord, I beg you to lead a life worthy of your calling, for you have been called by God." It doesn't matter who you are or what you do, you've been called by God. Now, when Paul wrote this letter to the Ephesian church, I want you to know that this Ephesian church was made up of all different types of people from all different types of vocations. Some people in this church, they were tax collectors. Some people were physicians. Some people worked in government. Some people worked in education. It's the exact same for each and every one of our campuses. It doesn't matter what you do, you have a calling on your life. And what's cool is that we all have different gifts. We all have different passions and abilities that have led you to your career path or the job that you have chosen today. And some of you, you have an incredible way just to teach kids or teach students. And because of that, you're either a teacher, you work in administration in different school districts. Some of you've been gifted in the medical field, and you're either a nurse or a doctor. Some of you have an incredible ability to help other people manage their money, and you're in finances. We all have different gifts. And what I want you to recognize is that when you honor God with everything you have, that career then becomes a calling. Okay, some of you, you have the gift. Some of you guys are like incredible craftsmen, and you're able to like go work on different things. This is not a gift that I have, all right? And some of you guys who are like building your own homes, I am so impressed by that. But I would put myself in the category of I have to usually look up a YouTube video to change a light bulb. Are there any other guys that would put themselves in that, or at least be willing to admit it? But this is a true story. This is just a few weeks ago when I was doing some stuff at the church, and I was able to run home for a few hours before we had another event back in the evening. And I got home, and I was starving. And so I do what I always do. I go to my cupboard where all of our snacks are, and just like I did 1,000 times, I go to turn the handle to open it, and it won't open. Like my door, like it literally, it won't open. And so what I do then is I call my go-to handyman who lives just a couple of minutes away, and it's Pastor Drew Gillespie, our Dublin campus pastor. And I called Drew up on the phone. I said, Drew, you're not going to believe this. I said, I'm home right now. I'm only here for an hour. I'm starving, and I can't get into my pantry. And he's like, what do you mean? And I explained to him what's going on. And so I'm like, you got to come over. And so he comes over. He brings all of his different tools. And sure enough, he's looking at it. He's like, yeah, your handle's broken. There's something going on here. He ends up finding a way to open it, but then he puts duct tape over the handle, and he says, we will get back to this. Well, guess what? If you go to my home right now, there's still duct tape on that handle. So this is a not-so-subtle reminder through the live stream to our Dublin campus to remind your campus pastor he still has a door to fix, all right? He's got to get over and finish that. But Drew has an incredible gift to be able to fix things and just work on things like that. It's not something I have, but all of us, we all have such different gifts that have led you to what you do today. I have two brothers that are local in the area. One is an engineer, one is a salesman, and it's just so evident that they're living in fields where God has gifted them, and they're living out God's perfect plan for their lives. Now, no matter what you do, it can be easy to associate in your own mind what I do Monday through Friday is one thing, and then when I actually show up on the weekends and I serve or I give or I do something else, they're two completely separate things. And what I want you to recognize is that when you honor God, I want to go back to last weekend, when you honor God with a portion of what He's given you, then every single thing that you do Monday through Friday has incredible value. You can't then separate your career from your calling when every time that you show up and you care for that patient, every time you show up to your school, every time that you drive to the fire station, every dollar that you make, lives are being changed, God is being glorified, and you are literally building the church of Jesus Christ. If that's true in your life, you don't have a career, you have a calling. And when God made the human spirit, He made us different than like when He made the animals. We have an innate craving for purpose in this life. And when you think about what you get to do with your life and the way that you get to provide for your family and the way that you get to bless other people and build your church, you and I, we don't just need something to live on, we need something to live for. And one of our biggest prayers for everyone who calls Cypress home, no matter what campus you're at, is that you would find that purpose here, that you would find that sense of community and belonging and know that we are making a bigger difference around Central Ohio and all around the world than any one of us could ever make by ourselves. We don't just need something to live on, we need something to live for. And making this shift in your mind from valuing compensation to calling is a big way to experience the joy that God has for us in this area of our finances. And I have multiple friends, and I'm sure you all could say the same thing, that they either moved out of state or they chased a bigger paycheck somewhere else. And maybe that lasted for like 30 or 60 days and they were excited about it. But eventually, people always realize that there's more important things in this life than how much you make. Trust God and follow your calling. Shift from compensation to calling. Here's the second shift that I want to talk about. And it's the shift in your minds from consumerism to contentment. To shift from consumerism to contentment. Now, this is a tricky one because our American culture is plagued by consumerism. And Olivia and I, my wife, we were having a conversation recently about our 2-month-old Keelan. And we were trying to decide when Keelan becomes a teenager, what are some of the things that we are going to tell him about from our childhood that he's going to think to himself, I can't believe it used to be that way. And because you can all probably remember things that your parents have told you, maybe when you were younger or now, and you're like, I can't imagine living in a world like that. And I'll tell you, one of the first things that we came up with with this whole idea of consumerism was the whole experience of the mall. Do you all remember how incredible the mall used to be? I mean, Olivia and I, we were talking about this again, like going from Friday after school to with your friends walking around the mall. I mean, the pretzel place, the smell is just filling the air. It was absolutely incredible. I mean, you could spend hours at the mall. It's so different now with Amazon and everything else. And with Black Friday, I mean, people would literally just trample each other, get in fights to get 20% off whatever it was that they wanted. This whole idea of consumerism, it's everywhere, at least in my childhood. It's everywhere all over this country. But when you think about consumerism, a big part of the reason it's such a big deal in our culture is because of the way that we were wired. And I was studying this whole idea of consumerism, and I found this interesting. There's this rule that actually a lot of financial people are agreeing with, and this is true whether you are a Christian or whether it's in the secular field. Everyone who studies this idea of finances is coming up with this 25% rule that's basically making the claim that for all people, no matter what you believe, financial peace is always just about 25% away. And it's so true. If you take your household income right now and you get out your calculator and you multiply it by 1.25 and you see that number, you probably would think to yourself, now, that would be pretty nice. If I just had a little bit more, then we would be living. If I could just have a little bit more. Now, the problem with the 25% rule is that it's a moving target. So as you increase, as you get more money, that 25%, it just gets kicked further and further down the road. It's always something that's moving. And this 25% rule, although right now is when people are starting to talk about it and understand what it is, it's really a rule that's been around for a really long time. And in Luke chapter 12 in the New Testament is really the first time we kind of see this. And Jesus is teaching to this massive crowd. This is when his ministry was really getting going. And he was teaching them about something completely unrelated. A big crowd is gathering. And as Jesus is teaching to them, there's a man that gets his attention somehow. And in the middle of when Jesus is trying to teach, he says, Jesus. He says, you need to help me figure this out. He said, my brother is the one that just received the inheritance from our father, and he's not sharing his portion with me. He said, Jesus, you got to help us solve this. And Jesus looked at him, and he first basically said, like, I'm not the one that's supposed to do that. But then he looks at this man who interrupted him, who's trying to explain that his brother needs to share, and Jesus says, beware. He says, guard against every kind of greed. Life is not measured by how much you own. And can't you just envision the guy staring back at Jesus like, so you're not going to help me? Like, you're not going to tell my brother what to do? And Jesus goes on to explain to him in the form of a story. Jesus tells this story in Luke chapter 12. He says that a rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. He said to himself, what should I do? I don't have room for all of my crops. And then he said, I know. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I'll have enough room to store all my wheat and other goods. I'll sit back and I'll say to myself, my friend, you have stored away for years to come. Now take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, "You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything that you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool to store up earthly wealth, but not have a rich relationship with God." To be content with what God has blessed you with is one of the biggest ongoing challenges for all of us in our life. And here's the question that I want to ask you then. In light of what Jesus taught to this man, what might be the bigger barn that you're tempted to be chasing right now in life? Maybe it is a bigger paycheck. Maybe it is some sort of promotion at work. Maybe your bigger barn is that every single year, every September, they release the new iPhone, and you know that you don't need it, but you really want it because there's one thing that's different, and maybe you just got an inside look into what goes on in my mind every September. But what is that thing in your life where you think to yourself, man, if I could just get that, then I would be happy? And it's recognizing that before you get that, before you start taking steps to get that, evaluating on this side, is that really something that's going to fulfill me in the long run? Because contentment is not the fulfillment of what I want, it's the realization of what I already have. And in this life, it's not bad to want, it's not bad to desire, or it's not bad to save up and to be disciplined so that you can purchase something. But if we ever allow what we want to cast shadows over what we already have, then we're going to miss out on God's blessings that are right in front of us today. And we are all so blessed in so many ways. And moving this shift from consumerism to contentment, it's really as simple as recognizing, God, what are the ways that you've blessed me in my life today? The third shift that I want to talk about together is a shift to move from being independent to God-dependent. To shift from being financially independent to God-dependent on all things. Now, financial independence is not a bad thing in and of itself. We talked about in week 2 how we don't want to be living paycheck to paycheck. And so what are the things that we can do to actually build the habits to invest in ourselves that way? But there's a lie that I think some of us have bought into, and I know I have on occasion, and the lie is that you can accumulate your way to security. That if you just keep making more, then you'll get to a place where you can be completely secure and at peace and have no problems. And in Proverbs, Solomon sort of explained this in Proverbs 18. He said that the rich think of their wealth as a strong defense. They imagine it to be a high wall of safety. And like I said, the whole idea of financial independence, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it sometimes can become a problem when we're looking to our finances to provide security that only our relationship with Jesus should provide for us. And here's the way that it works in our life, and in my life and in your life, I'm sure it's the same way. There's a certain number that's in my mind that I think to myself, man, if I could ever accumulate this much wealth, then I would be completely set. Then I wouldn't have to worry. I wouldn't really have to do much. If I could just get there, then I would be good. Or you could even use your checking account as an example. There's a number that I have, and I'm sure there's a number that you have. As long as it's above this, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling good. But as soon as it starts to go down there, then I start to say, okay, I'm not as secure now. I don't know what's going on right now. But like I said, it's only a problem when your future peace is more directly tied to the reality of your finances than who you are as a son or a daughter of Jesus. And so I want you to consider this question when we talk about being independent and where you find your security. And the question to consider is this: how much money would be needed to secure your future against all imaginable eventualities? Think about that for a minute. How much money would you really need to know that your future is secure no matter what happens to you, no matter what happens to your kids, your grandkids, no matter what happens to your home, your car? How much money would you actually need so that everyone around you is all set forever? I actually have the answer for you, right? The answer is it's more than you currently have. Which causes us to do what? It causes us to then hold on and to hoard all of these resources that God has blessed us with. Generous people, they give. Generous people are open. They let go. But stingy people, they hold on and they hold it tight to themselves. There's a word in our English language, miser. It's M-I-S-E-R. It's where we get the word miserable from. And what miser literally means is it's someone who holds. There is more joy found in being generous and recognizing that you can't accumulate your way to security, but your security is found in who you are is a huge step to giving yourself the permission to be able to let go and to be generous in this life. And so the trick then, or what we have to figure out then, is what is that sweet spot? Because like we said, we don't want to just be living paycheck to paycheck, but at the same time, we can't just accumulate our way to security or worth in this life. What is that balance? And unfortunately, I can't give you a specific amount. This is more of a gray area where you and the Lord really just have to spend time wrestling with what this looks like for you and your family situation. And it's something that Solomon also wrestled with in the Old Testament. And we've talked about Solomon before. He was a guy who he really experienced the pinnacle of what it means to be wealthy. If there was anything his eyes wanted, he took it for himself. He experienced it all. And he eventually understood this principle of balance. And this is what he had to share. And I think it might be helpful for some of us today. And it's in Proverbs 30 where Solomon said, "First, help me never to tell a lie. And then second, give me neither poverty nor riches. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, 'Who is the Lord?' And if I'm too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name." And don't you love the honesty of Solomon? He says, "God, don't make me too poor, all right, or else you know what I may have to do. I may have to go around stealing everything." But Solomon is saying, "God, I want you to help me find this right idea of balance. Not too much, not too little. And once you do that, then security can be found in Jesus alone." So the first three shifts we've talked through, the fourth and the final shift is a very important one, and it's to shift in our minds from owner to servant. This is not just true in our finances. This is our time, our talents, everything that God's blessed you with. You're not just an owner, you are a servant. And the verse that I want to show you that has to do with this one, it's Romans 1:1. And when Paul wrote the letter of Romans, this is exactly how he started it. This is the first line to the Romans where he said, "This is a letter from Paul, a slave of Christ Jesus, chosen by God to be an apostle and sent out to preach his good news." Now, I want to point out to you the word slave. And I want to give you a little Bible translation info. This NLT version, the New Living Translation, this is usually the version that Pastor Ken and I use whenever we teach on the weekends. And the reason for that is to go back to something he said last weekend. We are an evangelistic church. And what that means is we're trying to present the gospel in a way where most people are going to be able to understand it and appreciate it and then respond. And the way that the NLT is translated is it just uses language that really common people use on a regular basis. And with this NLT version, it was published in 1996. The most popular Bible translation is something called the NIV version. The NIV was worked on in the 50s and the 60s. It was published in the 70s, and it's by far the most published translation that's out there. Now, with the NIV version, though, because the word slave carried such negative connotations in the 1900s, they chose to switch out the Greek word and make this servant. But in 1996, when they were looking at this again, they chose to re-put the word slave back in there. And the reason for that is because the Greek word doulos, what it literally means is slave or bondservant. A servant is someone who is hired to do a job. A slave is what Paul was talking about here. It's someone whose identity is tied to serving their master. And so I want to put you in the position of the Roman people. When they get this letter and they read it, and the way that Paul started it is he said, "Hey, I am a slave of the carpenter from Nazareth." If they would have taken a poll and said, "All right, who wants to switch spots with Paul?" like nobody would have raised their hand. Nobody wants to be a slave. And in fact, there's even other times where Paul is writing in the New Testament and he explains, "My life, it's being poured out like a drink offering. Like everything I am, I'm just pouring it out for all people." And oftentimes, and I'll use myself as the example, when I read scripture like this, there's a part of me in the back of my mind that thinks, why would I ever want to do something like that? Why would I want to get to a point where I would refer to myself as a slave or someone who completely pours themselves out for everyone around them? And I feel like recently in my life, God has been teaching me even more and more about what this is and why it's something that we would want to do. And I referenced earlier in this teaching, my wife, Olivia, and I, we have a 2-month-old little boy named Keelan. And Keelan is growing and eating, and he's doing well. Definitely, everything is going very well. But Keelan is at the stage of his life where everything that he needs has to be done by Olivia and I. And those of you that have had raised kids before, you know exactly what stage this is in. But I mean, from eating to sleeping to pooping to wanting to roll over to right now we're really into lights. We love looking at lights, but sometimes we want to look at this light for 30 seconds, and then we want to be walked over there so we can look at another light, and then we want to look out the window. So everything, I mean, from an entertainment standpoint, everything is done by Olivia and I. And so when you think about our roles right now in life with Keelan, you could easily say, I am a slave to my son. Like really and truly. Now, if that's still true when he's 16, y'all, that's an issue. So say something to me, please. But at this point in our lives, like we are a slave to our son. Anything that he wants, we are there to serve him. We are there to provide his needs. We're there to do whatever he wants. But this is the part that I didn't really see coming until we became parents. I am a slave to my son, and I can honestly say that right now, I've never had more joy and purpose in my entire life. And I'm starting to learn and understand even more of what it means to make the decision in your heart and in your life. I'm not an owner. I don't own my time. I don't own my finances. I'm called to be a steward and a servant for all of those people around me. And I'm learning that as long as we insist that we remain the center of our own universe, we're actually going to miss out on the deepest levels of joy that this world has to offer. And it is when you serve, when you pour yourself out. But here's the deal. We don't like this idea of serving a master. Like when you first hear it, our human minds, we think to ourselves, that's not something I want to do. I don't want to be instructed. I don't want to be told what to do. But when we do submit the way that Paul is talking about, then we begin to experience the joy that he's talking about. This is one of my favorite proverbs that kind of explains this whole idea. It's Proverbs 11:25, where the Bible says, the generous will prosper, and those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. So as you invest and pour yourself out into other people, into your family, into your coworkers, you yourself are actually the one that's being refreshed. And oftentimes, whenever we talk about finances and this topic of giving, it's easy for us to calculate, okay, what is the financial loss for me personally going to be if I make this investment into my church? Sometimes what we forget to recognize, though, is what is the sense of joy? What is the sense of peace? What is the sense of connectedness that's going to come back my way, knowing that I am an instrumental piece to building the church where lives are being changed every day of the week? And one of the coolest things for me as a pastor is to just get to hear stories of different people that are on this journey, that make the decision, that make the commitment, and then start to receive some of the blessings that the Bible is talking about. And I want you to hear this specific story from Brian and Julie from our Dublin campus and some of the things that God has been teaching them over the last couple of years. So check this out.
I'm Julie.
I'm Brian.
And I'm more of the budget guru.
And I'm the dreamer.
But the one thing we do see eye to eye on is honoring God with our finances.
We all agree that giving is a lot better than receiving. But through our giving, all the blessings that he gives back to us is amazing. We don't deserve it. We don't earn it, but he gives it to us anyway.
Yeah, so the joy of being faithful and giving, we're able to do a lot more, not only giving to others, but also just within our own lives, being able to travel. We're going to Hawaii in January with our small group.
Tithing was not easy at first, for sure. I think initially I felt like it was mine. As you grow into this faith of just putting God first, you realize that it's His.
So God just has continually shown me, and increased my faith through seeing how He's worked through my finances. He's always going to be faithful, and He's always going to take care of you, and He's going to honor that step that you're taking in that commitment.
I love getting to hear stories like that. And I don't know how many of you caught that Brian and Julie are going to Hawaii with their small group. How many of you just thought, I might have joined the wrong small group this semester? Here's the deal, though, with this whole, with the idea of once you make these 4 shifts, there's a couple things that happen, and this is kind of how I want to wrap this series up. One of the things that happen when you make these shifts in your life is, like we've said, you begin to experience the joy that God designed you to experience. That's something that happens on the inside. There's also something that happens on the outside, and that it's when you make these shifts and when you put everything we've talked about this month into practice, you start to leave a legacy that's going to far outlive your earthly life. And whenever we talk about legacy, it can be easy to think to yourself, what is a way to really understand what the Bible means by this? And what I want you to do is I want you to envision with me, I want you to picture what the world will look like in the year 2055. In the year 2055, that's 30 years from now, the reality is not everyone is even still going to be here, but the things that we're investing in, the things that we're doing are going to last forever. I want you to think about what will your family look like in 30 years from now? What will your workplace look like in 30 years from now? In all likelihood, you won't be there, but it'll still be going. What will your relationships look like in 30 years from now? And there's a passage in the New Testament where Paul was teaching again, and he was trying to explain to people that what you're building right now, people build their lives on all kinds of different things. Some things will last forever, some things won't, but I want you to pay attention to the picture that Paul is trying to paint for these people. In 1 Corinthians 3, where Paul says, anyone who builds on a foundation may use a variety of materials, gold, silver, jewels, some wood, hay, straw. But on Judgment Day, fire will reveal what kind of work each builder has done. The fire will show if a person's work has any value. If the work survives, that builder will receive a reward. But if the work is burned up, the builder will suffer great loss, and the builder will escape, but like someone barely escaping through a wall of flames. Now, here's the deal. I've heard preachers and I've heard pastors use this passage in a variety of ways. Some good, some probably not so good, where people try to scare you into thinking turn from your ways, invest in the right things. That's not the way I'm trying to use it this weekend, but I think it's important that we acknowledge and recognize there's going to be a day. You all, there's going to be a day where everything that you can put your hands on, everything you can place your hands on, it's really not going to matter. Right. And so when you look at your life and you look at the things that you're investing in, the question that I want you to consider as we wrap up this series is, what are you building today that, come on you all, what are you building today that fire can't touch? Because I promise you there's things in your life, whether it's your relationships, what is the investment of your time right now, and what are you building that's going to last forever? I don't know what the rest of 2024 is going to throw at us. I know we got a lot of big things coming up, but what I do know is that when we make this not about us, but when we truly make it about loving God, serving our families, investing in our communities, when we do this whole financial thing God's way, it's so much better than our way would ever take us. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask everyone at every campus, if you would stand up with me, I would love the opportunity to pray for you, and then we'll all worship together one more time. Dear Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for this series. We thank you for this church and just for the opportunity to reflect on this important area of our lives. And Lord, I pray that you can give us the ability to make these different shifts so that we can truly experience joy in the life that you've given us to live. God, we thank you so much for the opportunity that we all have just to use the different gifts and passions and the things that you've given us. We thank you for the opportunity to be part of your church, to be building your church, where lives are being changed every day of the week. We love you, we praise you, and we pray this in the name of Jesus. And everybody said, amen.